Welcome to Spotlight on Ayckbourn, in which I delve into the archives to tell the story behind some of Alan Ayckbourn's most significant plays. In 1973, Alan Ayckbourn wrote his most ambitious play yet with the Norman Conquests trilogy, an epic, interconnected, three-play, 6-hour work looking at the events of one weekend from three different perspectives. It was gruelling and challenging to both write and direct, and it made Alan certain of one thing: his next play would definitely be on a far smaller scale. That play was Absent Friends, and in this spotlight I'm looking at its development and how it was written. The jumping off point for Absent Friends was the Norman Conquests. This was not only in the idea of writing something diametrically opposed to the trilogy in scale. He once noted it was the only play I could write following the 6-hour epic, but also as a direct result of his response to a specific scene from the trilogy. At the beginning of the second act of Living Together, the whole action pulled up with a jolt and the family sat and talked and read magazines. I'd never done that sort of thing before, with people just sitting and talking about themselves. Writing it, I felt nothing was actually happening, and it was wonderful to get it onto the stage and find a response coming off the audience. So I went back to Scarborough and attempted to write something that would involve the audience in an afternoon. Having decided to write a more intimate piece, the playwright still needed a subject, the solution to which was a rarity for him, as the entire play is very specifically drawn from one of his own experiences. It was actually inspired by a real event, and to that extent it's quite unusual, as I rarely write about an event from life. A friend had lost someone dear to them in terrible circumstances. A group of us had invited her around and she was better than we were. The tables were turned and our slightly strained relationship showed signs of breaking up instead. I realised this was good dramatic material and was rather guiltily putting it all away. Having found a subject for the play, Alan turned his mind to how he would develop the piece and structure it. We're fortunate in that some of Alan Ayckbourn's earliest notes for Absent Friends survive in the Ayckbourn Archive held in the Borthwick Institute for Archives at the University of York. Despite intending to write a more intimate play, Alan still began with the idea of an unusual structure for the play. Similar to the Norman Conquests, he initially toyed with the idea of presenting an event from different perspectives, albeit on a smaller scale. There are 2 pages of notes in the archive which quite clearly indicate a Sunday dinner set over 2 acts in 4 scenes or in 3 acts. Both concepts feature a dinner viewed from the perspective of first one sex and then the other, culminating in a post-dinner scene uniting all 6 characters and, presumably, highlighting the differences of opinion and experience between the characters and the sexes. The earliest notes also feature various ideas for the title of the play, such as According to Taste and A House Divided, although crucially, Absent Friends can also be seen on the list. The second page features the 3-act structure of the dinner play, as well as some character notes. We have a husband whose wife has died, with the dinner involving his brother and sister, as well as a friend of his late wife. Several names are found on the script, but there's no indication which character is which, although most of the pages refer to Diana as the character who has died prior to the play. This is, quite obviously, not Absent Friends, the structure of which is memorable as it is set completely in real time, the elapsed time being the same for both character and audience. There are no time jumps or changes of perspective. 2 hours of these characters' lives unfold in excruciating detail over 2 actual hours. It has a structural simplicity and elegance. At which point, one presumes Alan had a revelation and decided to set aside his more complex structure for something completely different to what he was associated with. With Absent Friends, I deliberately laid down all the safe apparatus one uses to ensure that something works. In Absent Friends, one almost said, no, I won't use that and I won't do that. It's like fighting and saying, I'm not going to use my right hook because I know it's very strong. I'll use my left. It sounds as if I deliberately tried to write a bad play, which wasn't actually true. I tried to write something different, and it's always dangerous because if you do change your spots, having gathered a fair public, you can make them very offended. Further notes bring us closer to the familiar. At this stage, the gathering appears to be family-based. However, Gordon, not Colin, is the husband of the late Diana. The names are all familiar, just not in the roles we expect. Gordon, Diana, Caroline, Paul, John and Evelyn. Only Arthur, the father, doesn't make it into the final play. A further development sees Colin, now the bereaved husband of Diana, with everyone else part of the same family, with the father Arthur, his son and daughter and their partners. We don't, sadly, have the final piece of the puzzle, in which these characters go from a family gathering to just friends of Colin, nor of Diana being replaced by Carol as the late fiancée. However, we do have some notes which, again, seem to have many of the pieces of the final play, just not quite in the right place. As Alan's handwriting is notoriously difficult to decipher, here's what it says. Paul tells Hannah he is leaving her for Betty. Hannah is hysterical. She says she is going to call Betty and have it out with her. Paul protests. What's the use? She's a nice girl. Colin is expected, invited by Hannah. His wife Diana has died. John and Evelyn arrive with baby. John is hypochondriac. Evelyn is an indecipherable piece of Alan's writing. The elements are embryonic here, but recognisable. In the actual play, Paul and Hannah will become Paul and Diana, with Paul having an affair with Evelyn, wife of John and mother of Wayne. The hypochondriac is the unseen Gordon, whose wife Marge is also present with Colin, the bereaved fiancé of Carol. Now these are all the notes we have, but they offer a fascinating insight into Alan's thought processes, and as we can see, many of the elements are present. They just need to be moved into their final places. Alan is notorious for writing plays close to the latest possible deadline during this period, but Absent Friends pushed this to the absolute limit. Alan was working in London, having not written a word of the script, when he returned to Scarborough on the Thursday, before rehearsals for Absent Friends began on the Monday. He apparently wrote the entire script in a flurry between Thursday evening and Friday night. The play was then typed up on Saturday and copies made and delivered on the Sunday for rehearsals the next day. Extraordinary. The first draft of the play was reputedly extremely close to the final performed draft. Alan wrote what I consider to be one of his most significant works in a single day. This is despite Alan being aware it was a potentially very tricky play to write. One of the areas I wanted to write about, because it was a personal situation, was not about death itself, but about people's attitudes to death. A very dangerous area to write comedies about. I'm dealing in topics which I suppose themselves are quite serious, but viewing them, I hope, in a sympathetically comic way. Absent Friends premiered at the Library Theatre Scarborough on the 17th of June 1974. It was performed in the round, and Alan feels that although not explicitly written for in the round performance, it works best in this sort of small space. The audience are almost voyeurs of this intimate, uncomfortable gathering. Where the play has often had problems is when it has moved into larger theatres, where that sense of intimacy is lost, and the playing of the piece becomes exaggerated. It is a play for a small, intimate theatre where one can hear the actors breathing and the silences ticking away. It was a terrifying risk when it was first produced, I'd never pitched anything in quite such a low key before. Alan was worried that a play about death, and more specifically, the death of love, might be a hard sell. He was pleasantly surprised. It was well received by Scarborough audiences, had positive reviews, and was so popular its run was extended by a week. It is also, undoubtedly, one of Alan's pivotal works which would have an effect on his progression as a writer. Yet again, he was moving out of his comfort zone to challenge both himself and his audiences, and it would have a profound impact on much of what was to follow. Perhaps this is one of the reasons why it remains one of the playwright's personal favourites. Absent Friends was a watershed play for me, a complete change of direction. It was for me a turning point. Other plays such as Just Between Ourselves and Woman in Mind would not have happened if I hadn't have had the confidence to write this play. That's how Absent Friends came to be written by Alan Ayckbourn. I hope you've enjoyed this glimpse into the archives, and thank you to the Borthwick Institute for Archives, where Alan Ayckbourn's notes are held. If you've enjoyed the Spotlight, please subscribe, and see you in the next Spotlight.